I have lived long enough to know that opportunities must be seized or they will be lost.
Welcome back to Wall Street Radio. I'm your host, Tanner, here with my partner, Dan. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the state of the market over the last few days, kind of what we're seeing as far as price goes, pushing up into all-time highs, but starting to slide. We're also going to be talking about the housing market in an article that we just published today, kind of covering the state of the housing market, the lasting impacts from 2008, and how that's impacting new home buyers today, as well as the infrastructure long and kind of the thesis that if we do go into economic decline, how are we going to be saved from that? So just exploring some options with what's going on around the world right now and how that's going to impact markets, and then also discussing how we're going to get out in the event that it all comes to fruition. Enjoy.
Let's jump right in. The market has taken a fat dive last Friday. It sold off this morning. It rebounded, which I did not expect. What are your thoughts?
I also did not expect it, but again, we're still below the false breakout. So I think a range bound or chop or decline, it's all in my book the same. It's just not going up anymore. And that's the key point for me. I posted a tweet earlier today, kind of how price has gone and how the market has acted over the last couple of years. We've seen a large breakout after months of consolidation, a lengthy move up, and then a large base, and then a lengthy move up, and then a large base, and then a lengthy move up. That's kind of been the trend for the last couple of years. And this time, for the first time, we've seen price in the market attempt to make a new all-time high, but quickly fail below. And that's generally a sign of topping action in the market. So, yeah, I think we're seeing that right now for the first time in the last couple of years, and that's not a great look for the broad market.
Yeah, and when you combine that towards Q4, a lot of fund managers were talking about S&P goal of 600, and at that target level, they would start to de-risk. I know in a letter yesterday, I believe Warren Buffett spoke to the investors and shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway, and he's building a much larger cash position than he's had in the past 2-ish years. So that's something that I know people are monitoring. But just from a general standpoint, 600 for SPY was a huge point for people to hit and de-risk. And so now it's like, where is the extra juice going to come for us to hit 700? And so on and so forth. So that's one thing that we're not seeing in the market. We've seen saturation and fluff in the tech group. And so it's interesting. We talked about rotation probably 2 to 3 weeks ago and how it's been the first time in a while we've seen such dramatic rotation into industrials and into things like financials. That's been the theme the past couple of days. Healthcare has been on a ripper. AbbVie and Abbott are cruising to new highs after really years of consolidation, actually.
Yeah.
And then industrial names. I mean, American. What's the one I showed you earlier? American Energy. Yeah, AEP hitting an all-time high, breaking a triple or quadruple top going back 10 years. So we're starting to see a little bit more of defensive maneuver with some funds. So that's been really interesting to watch as the S&P has not turned over, but Friday's sell-off was rather significant. And now it's holding the 50 MA, but whether or not it continues to do that over the next couple of weeks, I'm a doubter personally. I don't think it's going to hold just with all of the news happening. The news cycle is on a tear constantly about whatever Trump is doing or what Elon is doing. It's just nonstop. Like the fact that they're not going to pick up like any good news is really high, right? They're just going to continue to play bad news, and I think it's going to catch up to us. So that's just my prediction. I think we break the 50 and we slide probably down into the 475, 470 range for the S&P.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a pretty large pullback, but at the same time, it's like, man, the dominoes are just lining up. And we talked about this on the last pod. The dominoes are starting to line up and really show the direction for the next couple of months. And it's becoming a more and more likely scenario that I think we have to now consider, especially with price giving us that false breakout to all-time highs and then failure back below. That's just technical topping. And I know a lot of our listeners aren't super familiar with price action and techniques, but when you have something that makes an effort at a new high and then fails to do so, that generally leads to at least weeks of consolidation or a larger pullback in the coming months. So something to pay attention to there. I think also something worth noting is that now that the inauguration is out of the way, we're 6 weeks out from inauguration, or really 4 weeks out from inauguration. The voters, I'm noticing more and more kind of distrust. I don't want to say the word distrust, but I'm noticing more and more questions on social media feeds. Whereas Twitter beforehand was very bullish on Trump and staunch, standing behind everything he said. And now I'm seeing the cracks start to show in the eye of the public of like, I just wanted cheaper gas. And, now we're doing all these things. We're questioning whether or not government employees are actually doing their job. And personally, I think that's good. But the fact that questions are being raised on so many different fronts, I think just shows that maybe the voters are like, oh, geez, what are we doing here? What do you
Yeah, because when you think of the government as a whole, to say that the government mismanages its money, that is such a broad stroke of the brush. And I think there's certain pockets that mismanage money and do nefarious things with it, which is what we should go after and figure out, which is like the $3 trillion that are missing all of a sudden, or like the spending on condoms, or like random things that, even though it could be a rounding error to the entire budget, like these things do add up and they do matter. And I think it's important for us to have an understanding and control as to where that money is filtered. But I will say, I think the whole initiation of no bad spend left behind kind of thing, like a no child left behind policy with Trump, it's weird because like USAID, like I have a cousin that works within that area, and she does a tremendous job with what she does on a day-to-day basis, and like been in some very rough areas helping some people that really need it. And so it's tough, right? Because you're never going to be truly correct with your decision. Like if you say a broad statement like we need to make sure we have complete financial control over the entire government, you're taking on more risk of being wrong. You're automatically going to be wrong because the decisions you have to make, say like I need to lay off these people or I'm going to stop funding to this area, like not everyone is a bad instigator, right? There's good parties as a part of the government. It's not all just bad, which I do kind of worry about as a side topic, which is like, Trump and Elon. It feels like the last 3-4 weeks we kind of make it like all government like doesn't do a job, like they all do a job, and right now we don't have the technical capacity to replace them to do it more efficiently, and that also leaves us from a security perspective like a little exposed. But I think it's just a general questioning. I mean, a lot of people have family that work in government. A lot of people know one other person or their neighbor or someone affected by the layoffs. And so it's a really bold statement, right? Like if they're not taking their time with it, and that's more my problem. I stay very even-aisled on a lot of things just from growing up. I see both sides of the coin. I try to stay as really mediocre as possible and just judge everything independently and give it my own spin and my own perception and thought, or perspective. But the thing I continue to see is it's just been like so rapid fire, and we knew that this was going to happen because he only has so much time with those tailwinds in the Senate and the House to make as much change as possible. So it's about like less than 2 years now.
Yep.
But I don't think that means you need to take this much risk, right? Like there's a lot of risk in what they're doing, and that's changing public perception. And it's also impacting the lives of Americans, right? The whole speech and everything we talk about is for the betterment of the United States, to make the United States stronger, to make us more fiscally sound, but like culturally to be, to come together as one. That's like this whole movement. But you're impacting a lot of Americans when you make drastic cuts to the government, right? Like a lot of those are American citizens. So I'm not surprised at all that people are starting to question the other side of the coin and say like, did I choose the right side? Did I make the right decision? This isn't exactly what I thought was going to happen. It should have been, this was the only way to do it, right? He has 20 months to get this done. So that's just kind of like my thought on it.
No, I agree. And I think this is a conversation I had with my mother and my grandmother actually a couple days ago, which is when you're trying to make drastic change, you always broad stroke early, and that usually leads to an overcorrection in one way or the other, like a pendulum swing, as we know happens in politics all the time. You have a swing to one direction as people want change, and then it goes too far, and then it kind of swings backwards. Well, I think Trump is trying to force swing the pendulum as far one way as he can, get as much done as he can in such a short a time, and kind of like, shooting first and taking names later, or whatever, however the saying goes. And, in the short term, that has lasting impacts on families and people who are employed, and it makes a lot of people look bad, and it brings up a lot of questions about whether or not it's the right course of action. But at the end of the day, because he has such a short time, he has to take this route. At least I think he believes that he has to take this route of, screw it, I'm just going to slash as much as I can now, and we'll replace what we need to in the end. Like, we'll figure out who actually needed to be there, and we'll rehire them, or we'll bring in new people, or whoever it might be. Whether or not that's the best course of action, I don't know. But I understand the direction that he's taking, which is, I don't have a lot of time. I have to get as much done in as little as I can. So I'm just going to probably do too much early, and then we'll put Band-Aids on it in the after. Because I think his goal, which is to kind of get government spending under control, it does take drastic change to make any of that stuff happen. I don't think you can kind of piecemeal it out or nickel and dime it here and there to make drastic change. You kind of have to make a mistake first and then fix it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Because the budget's so big, you need to make really large impact very quickly and over like a very diverse set, which is the government, and really just impact like a ton of agencies all at once and sweep together as much fund or like potential funding back to the budget as you can. Like, now, do you think the savings that they're accruing so far, I mean, they're significant. Do you think it's going to be as much as they really said was out there, or are we going to kind of get to the end of this and say, hey, we saved a good bit, but it's not nearly as much as we thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you and I probably know better than most, just following Tesla for so long, that Elon specifically is big on promising hugely and then delivering a little bit smaller. He's not a big under promise, over deliver type guy. So I think as far as Doge is concerned, yeah, I think they're going to save a lot, and any savings is good. I totally agree with that. I think any savings that we can make are a great impact, and that it should be done. But yeah, I don't imagine it'll be quite the number that they're anticipating, unless they start getting into some of the really big contracts and some of the big kind of where the funding is going, education, defense, maybe even infrastructure. I don't know. But I think unless they tap into some of those bigger markets where a lot of the spending is going, you're probably not going to see the numbers that they're expected to project, or that they're projecting and expected to save.
Yeah, I mean, unless the money is going to fund Elon's child support. Like,
He's going to need it. He needs his own budget for that.
he's got
13 kids.
yeah, four different mothers across 13 kids is crazy.
Yeah. Twitter's kind of in an uproar about that. I keep seeing a lot of his baby mamas talking about him not supporting the children, and I don't know, just a whole bunch of drama. I don't know. I try and avoid that, but it obviously pops on my feed because it's his platform, so of course it shows up.
Of course, yeah. Anything, I try not to follow it, but it's always just on my trending, and it's always like on my home feed. I don't know if they're gonna find as much as they thought they were, but again, like, hopefully we all want the country to be more financially sound. And it's interesting just because more and more people I know, Senator Ron DeSantis out of Florida gave a press conference earlier today, talking about the potential to do away with property taxes in Florida. So now you're talking about no income tax, no property tax. I'm not sure how they would pull that off yet, but listen, I think everyone would be happier if there was no income tax. That's like across the board. People would be stoked. I don't know if that's necessary personally. Like, I've always been a proponent of the flat tax, because everyone just pay 10% of what you make and we'll all be good. The problem is that the top echelon of 1%, they don't pay anything, and they pay literally next to nothing. So the billionaires, and what will soon be trillionaires in the world, they need to pay like a lot more, and that's going to push down and give back a lot to the US. But they all find loopholes and they put it back into corporations, and it gets really messy. But I don't think like someone doing really well, for example, working like let's say a mid-level engineer at Microsoft today is only paying 4% less in taxes and income tax per year than Elon Musk, according to the current like financial guidance of the tax system. Like that's really messed up. Um, so I just, I don't think because in that example is like 28% to 32% or like 33%. Like it's very nominal. You need to be able to capture as much as you can from the top echelon who keeps kind of running away from it. So that's going to be something I just think like overall with the savings that they can accrue through Doge, and hopefully they're able to do that. But I do hope that they're able to mitigate the risk to employment in the US, because employment's also like a very important economical monitor of where we are and where we're going. My concern in getting kind of rotating into something that we've been talking about lately in an article that was sent out today, um, is the housing market. And that circulates into this topic because unemployment's going to be spiking in the next couple of reports, not only from the massive layoffs within government, but then also the reports that are coming out right now about low, early entry, mid-level senior or like some actually even senior software engineers, but software engineers in general are getting displaced in the masses by AI. And so that was already going to be a big problem. Like those were things that we talked about as like software engineering. That's a huge problem. We'll see how the economy reacts. And now we have all this unemployment from the government. I mean, a lot of these people and a lot of people took on substantial risk during COVID and right outside COVID to purchase a home and make sure that, they're able to lock in a home before the market becomes way too tight. Well, the market's really tight now, and we're facing a variety of factors that are going to impact it. So I'm having serious concerns about what could be another financial crisis from the housing market.
Yeah, I think another thing to note as well, don't get me wrong, people were trying to buy homes for themselves during COVID, but a lot of people were buying second and third homes. I don't have the data in front of me, but I know through 2020, 2021, and 2 saw massive increases in not only like Airbnbs, Verbos going up, but also people purchasing those second and third homes. Everybody blamed BlackRock and the bigger corporations, who of course were purchasing cash and gross, but people were also doing it on their own, right? Oh, I want to have a rental property. I want to have a second house that pays for my mortgage too. We saw a massive uptick of that through COVID as well. So, as this crunch starts to occur, it seems like it could cascade quickly because it's not all it's not all like personal homes that people were buying through COVID. It was rental properties and vacation homes as well.
Yeah, and it was corporations though. Like
Yes, yes.
the second and third properties are at serious risk, especially if you have these layoffs that then they're not able to cover the mortgage. But then you have companies like Zillow and Redfin going in and actually, buying and gutting homes. Remember, I think it was like a year and a half ago, there was a ton of data out when Zillow bought the top. They were paying like $600,000 or $700,000 for homes that were 400,000 or 500,000. And there's a story about a guy who sold his home to Zillow. It was really worth like 500,000. He sold it to them for 650, and then a year later he bought it back for 500 because they just bought the top. So that was, when corporations start buying residential homes and then either trying to rent them out or flip them or sell them, like you're just increasing the risk and the pocket risk in real estate. And another thing that's obviously a factor and we have to consider is the fact that a lot of home building, whether it's construction or materials or anything going into that process, it's fueled by immigration labor. So like the workforce, especially in the Southwest, you're starting to see these pockets of homes that in neighborhoods that have been like halfway built. And since the deportations, and it's a ghost town.
Yep. Yeah, I saw a whole bunch of stuff on Twitter over the last couple of days of people reporting empty job sites in the Southwest, specifically in Arizona, is where I was seeing a lot of it. Like you said, you're seeing large tracts of houses that were going up because, again, coming into 2025, we had the largest amount of home builder applications put in for 2025 of any year by like 20 or 30% over last year. So there was a lot of volume coming into this year. Well, now with deportation, where a lot of that labor who's managing those homes, a lot of the labor is no longer there to finish out those jobs. And what you're seeing is just huge tracts of empty job sites. And I guess that fuels back into your point of like, okay, if we have a big unemployment problem and everybody's trying to build homes and they're not going to get them completed in the time that they want them to, it just creates a lot of dominoes that might not be one big one, but a lot of little ones that can add up real fast.
Yeah, without a doubt. And then we don't even curve into part of the problem that is explained in the article with the birth rates, right? And how that is impacted substantially since the 2008 financial crisis, being down more than 15%. And so, like, you start combining, the problem is that you start combining these dominoes one by one. And what's really acceptable in the market or acceptable in the economy is if you start lining up dominoes like 1, 2, 3, and then they fall. And then you rinse and you figure it out and you start repeating.
Right.
But the problem is since COVID, we've lined up like 15, 20 dominoes, and the ripple effect from those falling, right? That's like what we talk about with fault lines creating earthquakes. Like that's serious problems for the American economy. And it did well, I didn't talk about it in the article because the article is one that, the listeners should go in and read and understand that this is an onion you could peel for hours. And I didn't even get into it, but it is something I wanted to discuss, which is talk about college endowments. And you think about the amount of money that has been put into these large college funds, and the expectation appropriately is that they're going to continue to grow their base, right? Colleges are actually nothing more than businesses. They want to make as much money as possible through tuition. Think about how the birth rates are going to affect that in 15 to 20 years. And think about the current trend right now with society in this current generation. A lot are choosing not to go to college. So now imagine the ones not choosing to go to college, and now you have people in less relationships. The odds that they're going to have kids is substantially lower. So you're kind of accumulating this ball of fire really quickly where the odds that they go to college are lower. The odds that they get in a relationship are significantly lower. The odds that they have kids is dramatically lower. Who's going to college? And what happens to all these funds? And what happens to the college system and the endowments? Like that is going to be a torrential problem in the future. And that's a whole nother segment and segue to talk about. But it's important to understand that housing and what happened in 2008 with the financial crisis, it really put a lot of fault lines on the ground that we have not stepped on yet and that have really not erupted. And my concern is that because we've added so many dominoes up at this point, as soon as one falls, like Nvidia earnings here soon, as soon as you have one trigger event, it's going to unlock everything and they're all going to start rippling. Because we all push away the fear, we all push away the doubt. We see it day in and day out. All of us do. Is that like we know that there's something wrong with society. We are all concerned about the path we're headed on. We're not unified in that. And as soon as there's an event that exposes it and pushes reality into our faces where we can't endlessly scroll on a TikTok or a reel and like kind of hide ourselves from the truth, it's going to wake everyone up in a way that a lot of us are not prepared for. We saw what happened with COVID, and that was just a flash in the pan. I mean, something like this, if you were to replay the 2008 financial crisis today, I think it would be much, much worse, because at least the people going through it at that point were a majority of boomers and Gen X who grew up with a tougher life, and they had like, lower expectations of what wealth and what, complacency looked like. If you actually did that to today's society with all the stuff that we have, I think it would ruin the lives of a lot, and they would never be able to recover more mentally than anything.
Mm-hmm. More people are invested today as well than they were in 2008. I mean, the participation of younger generations being heavily invested in various markets is a lot higher than it was than in 2008. So I think you're absolutely right that the impacts would be a lot deeper. It's also worth noting when you talk about college endowments and college participation, I don't know if this is just a more naive take because I grew up in New York, more affluent community. So a lot of my peers and people around me, and even kids I went to college with, their college was paid for, or at least helped by their parents in some way or another. I'm thinking in 10, 15 years when millennial children, and now millennials are notoriously not great at saving and investing. It's one of the worst groups for it statistically. When their kids get to college age and their parents go, we don't have money for you to go. I think that only propels that idea of less kids going and enrollment being down. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, because they're going to lose it on meme coins and zero DT options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The younger generation, when their kids, and I say younger, I mean your generation,
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
15, 20 years, I just don't think the money's going to be there like it was. Like, I was very fortunate that, my parents did have a harder upbringing than I certainly had, and they were able to make something for all of us kids. I don't know if that's going to be the case for parents of today that have kids that are 0 to 5 years old right now.
Yeah, I don't know either, because costs everywhere are increasing at like a phenomenal rate, which is also the problem. Like the food, clothing, schooling. My buddy is having a kid in 2 months, and he contacted every daycare sitter or center in the Charlotte area, and every single one was booked. And he was reaching 6, 8, almost a year out of having the kid because he wants to go back into work pretty soon, and so does his wife, which I totally understand. And they finally found someone, and it's 3,000 a month. So you're paying 3,000 a month for your kid to be watched in daycare, and that doesn't even cover the food and like the potential cost of I mean, I know having a kid is expensive, but it's never been more expensive than today. Like life today is the most expensive it has ever been. And now go back to what we just talked about. Unemployment is ticking up, and we're looking to tighten the belt in a lot of different areas. When you tighten the belt and you also don't have like that much to rely on financially, it's really tough. A majority of the average, what was it? The average income for the U.S. citizen, something like $60,000 to $70,000, I think. And
Family income, median family.
yeah,
I want to say it was low 70s, but I'll take a look while you keep talking.
yeah, I mean it's low 70s, and so when you combine all those costs of having a kid, raising a kid, putting them through the schooling system, school lunches are going down in terms of quality. Like it's all fumbling into this one thing, which is not like a revolt. It's not an awakening, but hopefully it is of sorts, which is like people need to be pushed towards the reality of our situation, and that we're thriving as an economy in terms of technology, and like a lot of speculation that has not come to fruition yet. And so I'm just personally like I'm playing it very risk averse at this point in time, knowing that we have the factors of the housing crisis happening. Starter homes no longer exist for individuals in the 25 to 35 years of age range, because boomers and because the older generations are holding onto their homes. Again, I talk in detail about why this is in the article, and then you have just all these swirling factors. So, in terms of like what we're gonna do and where we are, right? How do you position yourself to keep up with the economy? And, two things. One, mitigate risk, but at the same time, make sure you're taking advantage of the economical situation and the factors at play.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's being defensive on the way down. So identifying stuff that people are going to need, assuming we do enter this kind of not recessionary period, but any kind of a pullback, or if some of the things we've talked about start to play out. More defensive stuff is going to do well. Obviously, that's not niche financial advice. That's pretty broad stroke, obvious things. And then as far as how to get out of something like this, I think it's an infrastructure play personally. I think if Trump forces a recession or accidentally turns one on, the way to get out of that would be to stimulate the economy through infrastructure spending. He's been notoriously known for talking, especially in his first term, about building new roads and new railways and waterways and whatever to kind of better connect the United States and keep us on par with what's going on around the rest of the world, as we see some other societies start to really ramp up their infrastructure spend. And if that's the case, that would be a decent opportunity for us to get out of a recessionary period or a large pullback in spend in the United States. So for me, I'm always of the opinion to look for the long. Like I'm not the big short guy. I'm not Mark Baum coming in here attempting to get the market crash and pin the top and do that. For me, it's always about looking for the next long and trying to figure out, okay, everything's going wrong. Where is the money going to flow to, and where are the best deals going to be? And I think that's going to be on infrastructure. Just because we have a president who's known for talking about stuff like that, whereas historically, it's not like going into the 2008 recession, Obama 2 years prior was like, we need to spend on infrastructure to save us from a potential recession, whereas Trump has been adamant about that. So personally, my look forward is, if this happens, and not to say it will, but if this happens, if we do get a large pullback in markets, I'm going to be looking for that infrastructure long. I think part of that has to do with the fact that nothing has changed in the sense that we need to protect ourselves with AI. That is an ecosystem that needs to be built out for the United States as a whole, regardless of the economic situation, because China's ramping it up. They declared it a national emergency, and that's just something that I think needs to happen. So I think from that perspective, that will kind of ramp up our digital infrastructure spend, and then also physical infrastructure spend brings jobs and hopefully gets America back on track in the event that we do have a period of economic downturn.
Do you think that is what would quantify for you this being a success for the Trump administration and for the
Yeah,
Republicans, really, at this point?
my takes on what is a success is not usually shared greatly with others, if we're being completely honest. Um, like personally, people that are concerned about jobs and concerned about government spend and the outcomes of that with loss of jobs, like, I think it's good. Honestly, I think it's great. I'm a big, I'm sure you've seen Parks and Recreation. I'm kind of Ron Swanson slash it slash it, and and that's okay, because I don't know. I guess personally, I've always found that, like, I'll be fine. Like, I'll always work hard, and especially in my generation where nobody really wants to work hard and everybody just kind of wants to get put on the payroll. It's like, I don't mind. I don't mind doing the hard work. So it doesn't bother me that that we could enter a period like this. And I don't know. Like, obviously, you want to avoid things like this, but it seems like a necessary evil at this point. Like, Mark Andreessen, who's a early investor in a lot of great companies that are kind of at the forefront right now, Anduril, Palantir, etc. He's always said, like, the acceleration of money at this point in time is getting to a point where, unless you make a massive overswing in the other direction to kind of cut it all and get us back to some kind of a baseline, like, it'll only accelerate, and then eventually you become Argentina, where you just have hyperinflation and it all goes bust. So I'm kind of okay with this happening. It's just needed. And if there's anything I learned from my dad growing up, is like, when everything's going terribly, this is like classic Buffett. When everybody's fearful, you should be greedy, and when everybody's greedy, you should be fearful. And I feel like we're entering a period where a lot of people are getting greedy, and that causes us to be a little fearful. And if we get another COVID, that's when you start to get greedy. I mean, I remember during COVID going around, like, as soon as COVID hit and we were just sitting at home, I remember just going into my dad's office, and he's just buying up as much stuff as he can buy, assets, things that people couldn't move. He's searching for deals on Craigslist for anything that he needed, farm equipment for our farm, ATVs, tractors, like anything he could get his hands on, because he's like, nobody can afford this stuff and nobody's buying it. So, like, that's the time to do it. So part of me is like, I don't mind when things like this happen, because I know that I'll be okay, in the sense that I've learned how to manage things like that.
Yeah, that it definitely makes sense. Do you think that, in terms of financially, after the 4 years, do you think it's possible for us to get the debt under control? Or is that something you'd like to see, which is, because I think it's really important, like anything, you have to be able to quantify what is success, because especially in a role like the president, where you can throw right? Spaghetti at the wall for 4 years.
Mm.
And maybe, right, even if you end up creating the Mona Lisa with pasta sauce, like if that wasn't the goal, then like you're going to be a failure. So I'm just curious, have we entered a state where so much is happening? Like with most presidents, really a lot of them, it's hard to say, like, was he a success? Was he a failure? Because they try to do so much and either they can't get it done because of the opposing power that sits in the House and the Senate, or they're able to get it done, but there is never really any predetermined goal or finish line or objective, right? So like that's kind of like where I'm at, which is when I think about the Republican side party and Trump and what he's doing, what is the goal? Is it to get us back to a normal baseline? Okay, like what does that look like? And what is that, more importantly for me, like in the path to get there, this is like a kind of a deep thing because it relates to a lot of other stuff in life, but in the path to achieve what you want, right? Like how much do you hurt on the way there? And like how much chaos do you create on your path to success? And is it worth it at the end? So let's say we continue to do these cutbacks, and I'm really just trying to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Let's say we achieve whatever budgetary marker we want to, but we also continue this path of layoffs and cutting. And in my opinion, it's kind of crazy to say, but big government, like Republicans used to stand very much for small government, less interference. I will say what's happening right now, like Doge is like a very, very big government type of agency. Like with that, it's one of the biggest I've ever seen in terms of their oversight, their control, the way that they're doing things. And if that is needed to accomplish the goal, then that's what's needed. But it is kind of funny that like it's very much the opposite of small government. Um, but if we achieve our goal, right, we get the budget back on track, we're healthier as a society. Like, is that success mean that there's no income tax? Does it mean that we move to a lower tax?
I think it means, at least personally, the way I see it is, it means less reliance on other countries. Because if you really drag this out, if you let the carpet run out for the next 50 years, maybe even 100 years, uh, I think what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine plays out at a more global scale. You get countries that are trying to go for resources elsewhere. So I think maybe Trump's trying to play a protective game there and just getting us less reliant on other countries. So in the event that the world does descend into a more kind of kill or be killed type scenario, we're just more protected. And because globalism is great, but at the same time, it eats away at us year by year. And as a citizen, you don't really notice it because you're just like, oh, okay, things are getting a little bit more expensive here and there. But eventually it accelerates and then it just multiplies faster and faster and faster. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, like we're so reliant on everybody else. I can't even buy anything domestically anymore. So I think he's just trying to get us to a point where, and I think this is what success is to him, get us to a point where there's not as much bloat within our own government. And like you said, Doge is big government, quote unquote, but it's for the purpose of creating small government. So I think long term, that's good. And as far as what success looks like, it's just less reliance elsewhere on the whole world for everything that we do. Because if you play this out over the next 50 or 100 years, I think personally there's just going to be more conflict. Like conflict is inevitable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think the phrase is funny of we need big government to get to small government. Like that's something that like a communist country would say. Like, we need this to achieve our goal.
Yeah, maybe,
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe I'm a fascist. So what?
yeah.
Just got that's right.
I mean, it's just a very interesting thing that's playing out because you have to tangle a bunch of political theories and ideologies, and there's no textbook answer as to how do you achieve what we need to. And yes, we definitely need less reliability on Asia, especially China and like any potential adversary that we could have in the future. Like Taiwan is still sitting there, not really sure what's going to happen. But yeah, I'd say that. I was just, for me, it's like, how do we quantify what success looks like? So like less reliance on other countries. I think doing away with the income tax would be fantastic. I think like mass legalization of marijuana and using the tax income from that type of commodity, like towards back into the infrastructure or back to the citizens would be pretty beneficial in my opinion.
Yeah,
I
my
think
only worry with that is if you look back at like I look back at the impact of drugs on societies throughout history, and generally when you introduce now stay with me here, when you introduce degeneracy into society, it doesn't typically end well. Like you look at the impacts of opium around the world throughout history and kind of how it impacted society with legalization. Not great. Not didn't end great, especially in China. So part of me is like, yeah, that would be great if we can legalize these things and use the tax revenue. But another part of me is like, for the right reasons, those things are great. I know a lot of these have medical benefits for people that are good, but at the same time, it can also be a large detriment to society if everybody's just nuked out all the time.
yeah, I mean they could be nuked out if they wanted to all the time though, right? Like if you want weed or you want marijuana, whatever you call it, like you can get it whenever, wherever you want. At this point, it's legal in how many states? Medically legal? Isn't it like 40 plus at this point? As someone in North Carolina, like one of the absolute last states that's ever going to do it, just because of the big tobacco presence here,
Yeah.
and being on the Bible Belt. But yeah, I
We're-
mean, I just think there's a lot of creative ways we can get there. I just hope it's not all done through like slashing of like government jobs, because again, at the end of the day, unemployment is going to have a huge factor on the economical function and like the actual consumer activity that we have in the country. So like it's an interesting balance that we're going to have to look at pretty far down the road, but that's why we have this podcast to kind of stay in tune with it on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis.
Yeah, not only is this podcast informative for people, like we've been getting a lot of positive feedback on just letting people know what's going on around the world, but also it gives you and I a great opportunity to kind of flesh out opportunity moving forward. Like us having these conversations where, on some stuff we agree, some stuff we don't. At the end of the day, it makes us think about what's going on and where the opportunity may lie from it.
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything else for this pod. Do you have anything else?
I don't think so. Oh, I mean, COVID part 2. We had that on the docket. We can spend
Yeah.
a couple of minutes talking about that. So we have heard reports that there is another strain of coronavirus coming out of the Wuhan lab in China. Very famous at this point in time. That's a developing story. We're watching BNTX and NVAX. Those are two vaccine manufacturers. NVAX had a great run in 2020 when they got a ton of funding from the government. Obviously, your main ones, Pfizer, Moderna. So something to keep an eye on if that ends up being material. That group has been strong for what it's worth. I mean, they've both been performing well recently. So maybe there's some money rotating there for a potential breakout. Another one. Take me back. Give me the masks. I'm still dust them off.
Oh, geez. I mean, we should get some early volume signs if the news is going to actually become something. And even if it's not like a full-blown COVID virus, even the fear or the potential for something like that again, if it starts hitting the media cycle like heavily, those stocks will continue to get some speculation and interest.
Yeah. Yep. And good ones to study nonetheless. So, I think that about wraps it. Man, what a sad podcast.
I know. I know.
What a doom and gloom that was. Okay, we'll end it with this. Maybe AI revolution saves us 10 years glory. No trouble, but we don't know.
Yeah. It's all up to AI now.
It's literally it rests on the shoulders of NVIDIA earnings in 2 days.
It really does. Let's actually talk about that real quick. NVIDIA earnings in 2 days. I mean, I'm taking the bet that if it misses big, we go into recession. Like that is my forecast, because there's no way.
Good Lord.
I really do believe that. I think the hype and the speculation, and it's all been down to this one domino that as soon as it falls, it's going to create more ripple lines that are going to explode. That again, like things have just been, you can't disagree with me that things have been festering for a long time. And
Yeah.
as soon as that
big domino.
yeah, it's a huge domino. If it does crash down, I'm not talking about like, hey, we slightly missed, the stock's down 2%, but if it gets absolutely manhandled, and there's going to just be a ton of doubt within the market as like again, the inflated PEs and the saturation that we've seen, which is we got this wrong, right? That will be the premise. We got this wrong. And it'll push everything lower. And I wonder if can healthcare save us? Can industrial save us like it has the past 2-3 days during this pull off? Healthcare is looking really, really good. I don't know, but that's kind of like my prediction with NVIDIA earnings personally, or as you call it, NVIDIA.
NVIDIA?
Yeah.
Dude, everybody makes fun of me for that. I feel like that's what it looks like. It's a big N and then Vidya.
Yeah, but there's no UH. It's not NVIDIA. It's NVIDIA.
All right. We'll agree
All
to disagree. We'll agree to disagree. I'm reactionary through NVIDIA earnings personally. I don't have too much exposure to that sector at all. So,
but if they absolutely crush earnings, is that validation for like 650 S&P?
The show goes on.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we're back in here the next couple of days. As soon as it happens, we're like, buy XYZ. That's the thing about the market is you just kind of move with the tide and you wait to see where the tide is actually going to be the strongest.
Yeah.
And that's like all you can do at this point, unless you're just like time of market long hold S&P, retirement type profile. But if you're swing trading or active trading on a more day-to-day basis, you just have to be so in tune. I used to say when I was doing this every single day a couple of years ago for like years on end, one day out of the market felt like a week out of the market, especially when Trump's president, because there's so much news, there's so much happening. If you really take your foot off the gas and you release and you're not up to date, you're so far behind almost immediately. And that's what makes trading during Trump presidency so incredibly tough.
Yeah. No, listen, we know it. Please, we get on here and flip flop all the damn time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of what we're in. I mean, we could come on here in 2 days, NVIDIA crushes and everything's back.
Yeah. Yep. Housing's back. Everything's back.
Right. It's just our job to be best prepared for both scenarios and then position accordingly. I think that's the best way we can describe kind of how we've been acting over the last couple of months.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Check out the new article. It's live on Substack. Check out the Twitters, of course, and we'll see you in a couple of days, guys. See ya.
Now watch this drive.